Hello and welcome back to my channel. I've got another long, mind-blowing video for you today, so I hope you're comfy. Today, in part 4, I'm going to take you on another ride through this newly connected material from our last major historical figure in the theory I'm presenting in this series. It has been quite a long journey that I hope you've enjoyed and continue to do so. I, for one, cannot believe how deep of a dive this has become and how much content I've been able to create out of this theory. And if this is true, the implications for what that means about the message they are sending with these games is insanely wild. To quickly summarize the theory that I'm presenting in this series, it's that the inspiration for Nintendo's Pokémon Scarlet and Violet is as follows. Ancient myths like that of the Egyptian Temple of Edfu, Plato's story of Atlantis, and the Mayan Popol Vuh all share the same themes of divine beings causing a cataclysm to stop the sinful technological advancement of the human race in a cycle that causes civilization to rebuild over and over again. These myths always involve serpents, which are often feathered, and these myths went on to inspire the Torah, the Bible, He Who Shall Not Be Named, Admiral Richard E. Byrd, a real-world parallel of Heath, and the events of World War II, causing ruinous disasters for Japan, where the Pokémon games are created. These myths also inspired many aspects of the Kabbalah, which was founded in Spain, and the Spanish phrase, in contrar to media naranja. Basically, most of human history revolves around these tales. According to Carl Jung, these ancient myths are like Platonic forms of circles, spheres, and discs, which are both imaginary and real. These Platonic forms evolved with Faustian technology over time and through worldwide events like the substitution of automobiles and airplanes with animals and monsters in the dreams of modern man. In his book, Flying Saucers, A Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Sky, he lays out his theory that this evolution of mythical Platonic forms caused the idea of flying, time-traveling discs. And these ideas have allowed Plato's name to live on in many Rainbow Book series that define security protocols and keep a record of our technological attempts to survive beyond this planet we're living on. For the visible spectrum of light between infrared and ultraviolet, as reflected through crystals, symbolizes the fire and sun of knowledge. All of this arcane, esoteric, and occult knowledge has been placed in Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, as Plato suggests in the Republic, to subversively educate rebellious youth through children's games as a part of the protocols for the Academies he founded in ancient times. This video is going to cover new theories that explain inspirations behind Scarlet and Violet, including new discoveries about how Plato invented the Academy and inspired the Academies of Paldea, how Plato's theory of forms inspired Pokémon, how Coridon's ability, Orichalcum Pulse, links to Plato's Atlantis and theories of cyclical civilization, how the connections between Atlantis, Iberia, America, and World War II connect to Scarlet and Violet, how a Spanish phrase, in contrar to media naranja, is a Platonic reference that gives meaning to both Naranja and Yuva academies, as explained by Friedrich Nietzsche. How pagan and Platonic ideas led to biblical parallels in Pokémon. How the real-world meaning of infrascarlet to ultraviolet rainbow books connects all of the light-reflecting symbology to these myths of superior beings thwarting the advancement of human knowledge, technology, and how that connects to compact discs. How real-world robotic expeditions are being done in the name of Plato to extend the survival and transportation technology of our race through infrared windows and terahertz transparency in dangerous remote bases and reporting their findings in red books. How the allegory of the sun, the simile of the divided line, and the allegory of the cave together from books 6 and 7 of Plato's The Republic hold the answers to the agenda of the Academies of Paldea. Why dogs are so important in Pokémon Scarlet and Violet's plots and Pokédex, and how Plato may be at the root of the inspiration for Pokémon since the very beginning. One of the craziest things about the theories I'm presenting in this series is that after months of researching, I have not encountered anyone else anywhere on the internet talking about most of these ideas in relation to Pokémon. Most everything presented today is completely fresh in relation to Pokémon, with few already made connections. If my research is correct, this video is filled with all new discoveries. Since my last video, part 3 on Carl Jung, I have seen just one other creator make the biblical connection and was excited to find out that they had seen my video. I'm sure now that someone else is talking about it, and now that the new trailer for the Indigo disc came out, it will catch on beyond my reach, but I believe my channel was the first place you could have possibly heard it. And there's so much more I'm putting forth in these series I have not heard anyone else discussing. Let me know if you've found anyone else discussing these things. I've started getting some really great comments that have presented new ideas I've never heard before and that I have added to this video. So I highly encourage everyone to comment, participate in the discussion, and clue me and everyone into anything I may have missed. With all of that out of the way, let's get into it. So here Plato. He was a highly respected and awarded philosopher from ancient times who created his own academy called the Academy, which was located by a grove. Plato's Academy was one of the very first known educational institutions in recorded history, and some consider it the very first university. So in a way, he is the father of the Academy. This is particularly significant to Scarlet and Violet because a Pokémon game has never taken place at a school before, but these do and have so many other references to Plato, like how Plato supposedly went on expeditions to dangerous lands, and much of his life is mythical, with many different accounts of his birth, early years, death, etc. So the line between fact and fiction when it comes to Plato's history is very blurry. This makes sense as Plato is the most ancient source we will be covering in this series, one of our most significant ancient sources ever on Earth. And it makes sense because it goes along with the theme in the games of fact versus fiction and how that becomes more obscured over time. Forms and universals. As Carl Jung pointed out in his letter to Bernhard Milt, which was reviewed in part 3 of this video series, Plato shares his same concept of archetypes, but he mostly refers to them as forms. Just like how the topic of the last class taught by Professor Jacques at the Academy is Pokémon forms, Plato refers to these forms throughout many of his works, and this collectively has been called the theory of forms. Plato's Allegory of the Cave is perhaps his most famous writing to contain an explanation of the theory of forms. And right at the beginning of Scarlet and Violet, we get our serpent airplane flying and crashing before entering a nearby cave. It doesn't stop there, because not only are the depths of Area Zero practically a cave themselves, but there are also 2 secret caves down there that have been discovered so far, including the one with the mysterious symbol with 4 circles, a square, and counterclockwise arrows, which is thoroughly explained by Carl Jung, Plato, parts 3 and 4 of this series. The Titan Pokemon, with their Herba Mystica, and the Ruinous Pokemon are also all in caves. There's even more on the Allegory of the Cave's significance in Scarlet and Violet that we will be exploring later in this video. The Wikipedia for the theory of forms describes that
the theory suggests that the physical world is not as real or true as forms. According to this theory, forms conventionally capitalized and also commonly translated as ideas are the non-physical, timeless, absolute, and unchangeable essences of all things, of which objects and matter in the physical world are merely imitations. The theory is considered to be a classical solution to the problem of universals.
This whole concept brings to mind the paradox Pokémon being imitations, as well as how a Pokémon in its terrestrial form is imitating a type that is not its own. Another way to think about it is with the example of spheres throughout the universe. Most astrological bodies are spheres or disks, but none of them are perfect. A perfect sphere in which all points on the surface are equidistant from its center isn't achievable in our physical reality, but conceptually exists exist nonetheless. And it's debated as to whether or not this conceptual realm of mathematical perfection actually exists outside of our mind. This debate is known as the problem of universals, and it's really what we are dealing with when it comes to not only all of the stories reviewed in this video series, but also specifically the paradoxical identity of paradox Pokémon and the type imitating terrestrial forms. The Wikipedia page for the problem of universals has this fun quote.
Universals are qualities or relations found in two or more entities. As an example, if all cup holders are circular in some way, circularity may be considered a universal property of cup holders. Further, if two daughters can be considered female offspring of Frank, the qualities of being female, offspring, and of Frank are universal properties of the two daughters. Many properties can be universal, being human, red, male or female, liquid or solid, big or small, etc. Philosophers agree that human beings can talk and think about universals, but disagree on whether universals exist in reality beyond mere thought and speech.
On a side note, we have more dualism, circles, cups, offspring, and the color red. But back to the main focus here, a problem of universals. You see, the problem of universals really boils down to an epistemological debate that gives you the terms necessary to define the universal qualities of any particular thing. One can determine how universal or particular a quality is by participating in this epistemological debate. For example, having purple hair can be considered a universal quality, and anyone who has purple hair shares this universal quality. This would also be true for having blue fur, white diamonds, two tails, a hollow crystal on your forehead, and for the ability to walk on water. On the other hand, when you consider the universal qualities of the species called walking wake, it includes many qualities that a Suicune does not share, like the flame-colored hair tips, the white-clawed feet, or being bipedal. So although they share many universal qualities, Suicune as a species is not universally the same as walking wake as a species. This logic has been brought to you thanks to Platonic realism, which acknowledges universals as a real concept. Wikipedia also has this to say about the theory of forms.
The early Greek concept of form precedes attested philosophical usage and is represented by a number of words mainly having to do with vision, sight, and appearance. Plato uses these aspects of sight and appearance from the early Greek concept of the form in his dialogues to explain the forms and the good.
More references to sight, vision, and also Plato's concept of the good, which has to do with discerning what is truth, knowledge, and good. This brings to mind the solar and light imagery of the games, with sight and vision being linked to the visible spectrum of light between infrared and ultraviolet. Also, the idea of the good thematically links to the ethical choices that the main characters of the story have to make, and the one that led to the two parallel universes of Scarlet and Violet. Appearance is a word you will keep hearing come up again and again when discussing Platonic ideas of forms, just like how Professor Jacques uses that exact word to describe forms in class at the Academy. So going along with this concept of Platonic forms or Jungian archetypes, you can see how the logic can be applied to Heath and the professor's story as a parallel to all of the stories I have presented in this series. Heath and the professors are particulars who share many universal qualities with all of the other stories we've reviewed, and the next ones coming up. If you follow the motifs, tropes, and reoccurring themes, you can see how Heath's story was inspired by the story of the missing diary of Admiral Richard E. Byrd, which was inspired by stories like Orpheus in The Secret of the Saucers, The Black Cloud, and The Midwich Cuckoos, which are modern retellings of biblical stories like the Paradise of the Garden of Eden, the Forbidden Fruit, the Tree of Knowledge, and the Great Flood, which were inspired by pagan myths with the same reoccurring elements predating Christianity. And those same reoccurring elements also show up in the iconic tale of Atlantis, brought to us in ancient times by Plato himself in his dialogues titled Critias and Timaeus, Orichalcum, and Cyclical Civilization. Throughout this video, not only will I provide evidence that Plato is referenced by many many parts of the lore of Scarlet and Violet games, but I am also going to provide evidence that Atlantis is specifically directly referenced, and not just in a reoccurring thematic way or by leaks. For example, the special ability of Bach's legendary Coridon is titled Orichalcum Pulse. A quick Google search for Orichalcum will give you the first paragraph summary from Wikipedia, which reads,
Orichalcum is a metal mentioned in several ancient writings, including the story of Atlantis in the Critias of Plato.
What's that right there in the first sentence? Atlantis and Plato. That's right. Also, Orichalcum was used to make coins, which brings to mind Gimmighoul yet again. On top of the direct mentioning of Orichalcum and Coridon's ability, there is also this description of the mysterious plates from Heath's book that reads similar to a description of Orichalcum.
During our descent into Area Zero, we came across a buried metal plate inscribed with a strange symbol. We attempted to shave off a piece of the plate, but failed to leave even a scratch. Even determining the nature of the metal seems beyond modern science. We know not why the inscription was made, let alone how.
This reads like a description of Orichalcum in real life in a couple of ways, because it is true that we do not know the nature of Orichalcum or how it was made, even though it has been written about in many ancient texts. With Paldea's modern science being unable to determine the nature of the plate in Heath's books, and with time travel being theoretically possible as proposed in these games, the plate could have been from a highly advanced civilization in the past or from a highly advanced civilization in the future. So an out-of-time artifact could mean an artifact that came from the future and wound up in the past, or it could also mean that the past had a more advanced civilization than we are currently aware of. This is a popular theory in a lot of sci-fi, conspiracy, occult, and paranormal motifs similar to those of Scarlet and Violet. These concepts are also discussed throughout Plato's story of Atlantis, World War II, Carl Jung's theories, and the Scarlet Pokédex entry for Iron Bundle, which reads,
Its shape is similar to a robot featured in a paranormal magazine article. The robot was said to have been created by an ancient civilization.
So right there we have an advanced tech robot in an ancient civilization, and its vessel even reminds me of a Baghdad battery. It has a swirling hexagonal solar symbol in its opening, and the Santa theme has a whole bunch of other occult aspects, but that subject may just be enough for a video of its own. Back to Orichalcum, Heath's page about the inscriptions on mysterious metal plates is also very reminiscent of the first quote we will be reviewing from Plato's Critias that refers to Orichalcum. It describes the laws of Atlantis being inscribed on the mysterious metal in the center of the city.
They were informed by the law and by an inscription left by the earliest kings on a column of Orichalcum preserved in the sanctuary of Poseidon in the center of the island.
So we have this idea of important inscriptions on mysterious ancient metal plates. But wait, there's more. Previously, through Plato's theories of forms and Carl Jung's follow-up with archetypes, we've talked about how conceptual ideas are repeated throughout time. Now, through Plato's descriptions of Orichalcum being used in Atlantis, we also get this idea of modern civilizations building on older civilizations in a literal, physical sense. The next passage in Critias that mentions Orichalcum has 3 references, all on one page, and it describes the Acropolis and its sanctuary like this.
The whole circuit of the outermost wall they covered with a coat, a cirrus, as one might say, of copper, the inner with melted tin, and the wall of the actual Acropolis with Orichalcum, which gleamed like fire. Within the Acropolis was the palace with the following design. In the very center, surrounded by a golden railing, which it was forbidden to enter, was an untrodden sanctuary sacred to Clito and Poseidon, the very place where the race of the 10 princes had been first conceived and begotten. Here, too, the seasonable offerings were made yearly to each of them from all the 10 lots. Poseidon himself had a temple, a furlong long and half a furlong broad, with a proportionate height, but something un-Hellenic in its aspect. The whole exterior of this temple was coated with silver, except the figures on the pediments. These were covered with gold. Within, the roof was throughout of ivory, ornamented with gold, silver, and Orichalcum, and all the rest, walls, columns, pavement, were covered with Orichalcum. It contained golden statues of the gods standing in a chariot drawn by 6 swinged horses.
Gleaming like fire again brings to mind all of the solar, fire, and light symbology. Gold itself is symbolically the metal that represents the sun, by the way, and the numerological symbolism evoked with the 6-winged horses is fully explained by the works of Carl Jung that we reviewed in the last part of this video series, as well as the works of Plato we will be discussing later in this video. In this excerpt, Poseidon, with his 3-pronged trident, is said to have a temple that is, and I quote, un-Hellenic in its aspect, which means it was not characteristically Greek like the rest of its surroundings. This was particularly interesting to me because it implies that in all of Atlantis, this one particular temple of Poseidon was so distinctly out of their culture that it was notable and possibly even indicating it is from a different, perhaps even more ancient time. Around this point in Critias, Plato even speaks of the capital city of Atlantis being inherited and added onto in the following quote, adding to the idea that he is explaining that civilizations are built on older, more ancient civilizations.
Each monarch, as he inherited it in his turn, added beauties to its existing beauties, always doing his utmost to surpass his predecessor until they had made the residence a marvel for the size and splendor of its buildings.
To really drive home that this theme reoccurs in both Pokémon and Atlantis, this theme of cyclical civilizations and technology advancing, being destroyed, and then being rebuilt up again, that is present in all of the stories mentioned in this video series. Let's remember the lessons of Professor Ryfort before reading a passage from Plato's Timaeus. In either Naranja or Yuva Academy, Professor Ryfort will teach you how Paldea has been through many periods of civilization and destruction.
Composition has shown that the crater is in fact over 1 million years old. About 2,000 years ago, this region came under the rule of the Chaldean Empire, having poured much of its human and financial resources into the exploration of Area Zero for so long. The Chaldean Empire fell into decline. 200 years later, or 800 years ago, the empire and its surrounding nations united into one entity. This was the foundation of Paldea as we know it today. This very academy where you're now filling your young minds with knowledge was also apparently established at that time.
So we don't know what kind of civilizations may have occurred in the region before 2,000 years ago, but we do know some destructive event caused the creation of the crater 1 million years ago. The Chaldean Empire established itself, declined, and then built itself back up again. And later, Ryfort tells us of a fairy tale that she believes to be true. Another reoccurring theme of fact versus fiction. Spoiler alert, according to the plot of the games, this fairy tale does indeed turn out to be true, as Ryfort announces this to you and verifies that the ruinous Pokémon are indeed the treasures from the fairy tale. The fairy tale is about a Chaldean king from an unknown time who was seeking out treasures from other lands.
So, the king obtained these 4 treasures, and on that very night, it is said that a terrible disaster rained down on his castle, reducing it to rubble by dawn.
She later elaborates.
A vessel, a sword, a set of tablets, and a set of beads. After obtaining these 4 treasures, the king's castle was destroyed. Why, you ask? Because these 4 treasures were actually 4 Pokémon. As these Pokémon were passed from human hand to human hand as treasures, they slowly became tainted by hubris and greed. Finally, after coming in contact with the rapacity of the king at that time, they awakened as disasters and began to rampage out of control. The king called for renowned Pokémon wielders to defend the country, and after a fierce battle, these incarnations of disaster were quelled. I have read many historical disaster reports, personal journals, and the like. The cursed treasures, the 4 Pokémon of ruin, they exist.
Ryfort's story sounds so similar to the tale of Atlantis. She mentions that the castle was reduced to rubble in one night by dawn, just like Plato's accounts of Atlantis being destroyed in one day and one night. She also mentions hubris, which is in the first sentence of Atlantis' Wikipedia page, as it reads,
Atlantis is a fictional island mentioned in Plato's works Timaeus and Critias as part of an allegory on the hubris of nations.
Now, personally, I don't know how anyone could be so bold as to say that they know for certain that a country named or similar to Atlantis could have never existed, but at least Ryfort shares my spirit with her story of the Paldean ruinous disaster. We believe together. Ryfort's description of Paldean history, coupled with her telling of the myth of the ruinous disaster, sound just like this description of Atlantis from Plato's Timaeus.
Solon,
Says one of the priests, an exceeding old man.
you Greeks are always children. There is no Greek that is a graybeard.
How do you mean that? Says Solon when he caught the remark.
You have all boys' minds.
Says the priest.
Ancient tradition has stored them with no venerable belief nor any hoary lore, and the cause is this. Many and divers are the destructions of mankind which have been and shall yet be. The greatest are wrought by fire and water, but there are others, slighter, wrought by countless causes. Thus the report which is current even among yourselves that Phaethon the sun-child once harnessed his father's car, but being unable to guide it on his father's track, scorched the face of the earth and was himself consumed by the thunderbolt, has indeed the semblance of a mere fable, but the fact of it is a deviation of the bodies which revolve in heaven about the earth and a destruction, coming at long intervals, of things on the earth and much fire. Hence, at such times, those who dwell among mountains and in highlands and dry places perish more completely than dwellers by rivers or the sea. As for us, the Nile, our universal preserver, then preserves us from this peril also by his rising. On the other side, when the gods cleanse the earth with a flood of waters, while the herdsmen and shepherds in the mountains come safe off, dwellers in your cities are swept by the rivers into the sea, but in this land of ours, neither then nor at other times does water descend on the fields from above. Its way is ever to ascend from beneath. These are the causes and reasons for which the traditions preserved here are reputed the most ancient of any. Though in true fact, in all regions where excessive rains or heats do not forbid it, there are always men to be found, sometimes more, sometimes fewer, and whatever has come to pass that is heroic or grand or in any way memorable, in your own land, or here in Egypt, or in any other region that has come to our ears, the records of all this have from old times been written down here, in our temples, and are there kept safe. Whereas, with you and the rest of mankind, life has but just been furnished with the art of writing and the other requisites of cities, when the torrents come down on you from heaven again, at the usual period, like a pestilence, and leave behind them only the rude and unlettered. Thus you revert, so to say, to your childhood and know nothing of all that has befallen in ancient times, in our country or in your own. Why, Solon, the story you have just related of past generations in your own land is not much better than a tale of the nursery. Your people can recall but one deluge, though there were many before it, and what is more, you do not know that the bravest and noblest men of all history once existed in your own land. You and all your fellow citizens are sprung from a scanty remnant of them, though you never suspect this, because their survivors for many generations passed away without utterance in writing. Yes, Solon, once on a time, before the great deluge, what is now Athens was a city right valiant in war and with laws and all things exceeding excellent. Her exploits and her polities are said to have been the noblest of all under heaven, whereof any report has come to our ears.
So yeah, pretty darn similar. There are a lot of references from the games that we've been discussing that I've of course displayed on the right of the screen throughout the reading. A particular call out from this passage in relation to Scarlet and Violet is how the priest tells Solon that his people's recent history is nothing more than a fable or tale of the nursery, which brings to mind Ryfort's usage of the word fairy tale for a myth she believed to be true. Also, according to Plato's account here of Solon receiving the story of Atlantis from a priest in Egypt, it's no wonder there are Egyptian references throughout the games, like with Rabska and Espathra. To really be thorough with our references to Orichalcum and our motifs, we have one last passage from Plato's Critias. This passage brings up another reoccurring theme from all of the stories presented in this video series, the theme of paradise. When describing how the capital city of Atlantis was a paradise-like state of abundance, furnished with all the main provisions required for life. Plato describes the wealth brought from the island's treasures, mentioning roots, flowers, and fruits in the following passage.
Orichalcum, which was excavated in various parts of the island and had then a higher value than any metal except gold. It also bore in its forests a generous supply of all timber serviceable to the carpenter and builder, and maintained a sufficiency of animals wild and domesticated. Even elephants were plentiful. There was ample pasture for the largest and most voracious of brutes, no less than for all the other creatures of marsh, lake and river, mountain and plain. Besides all this, the soil bore all aromatic substances still to be found on earth: roots, stalks, canes, gums exuded by flowers and fruits, and they throve on it. Then, as for cultivated fruits, the dry sort which is meant to be our food supply, and those others we use as solid nutriment we call the various kinds, pulse, as well as the woodland kind which gives us meat and drink and oil together, the fruit of trees that ministers to our pleasure and merriment and is so hard to preserve, and that we serve as welcome dessert to a jaded man to charm away his satiety. All these were produced by that sacred island, which then lay open to the sun.
This has so many word-for-word matches with passages in Heath's books. The paradise theme, of course, connects these games to the Garden of Eden, which I started building the evidence for in the last video and will continue adding to this case in this video. Plato mentions the largest and most voracious of brutes being sustained by the land, which matches Heath's writing, stating,
The herbs were eaten by Pokémon, which in turn grew large and strong. We call these Titan Pokémon. One of our team suffered a brutal blow from such a beast,
giving us large and brutal thanks to eating the vigorous nutriment that is the unseen plant life, or plant life that is so hard to preserve in other lands. In this same excerpt, Plato goes on to mention the lush aromatic substances, roots, stalks, flowers, and fruits, directly matching Heath's books, which proclaim,
Within the great crater of Paldea lies the mysterious Area Zero, a place home to such landscapes, such plant life, and such Pokémon as we had ever seen. Area Zero was home to wondrous herbs that instantly impart vigor when eaten. Vegetation and sources of water are here as well. Legends tell that precious stones or wondrous fruits have long slept in Area Zero's depths.
This detail, like most details in all of these stories, reoccurs in all of these stories. Mysterious beverages made from unknown substances provide strong rejuvenating effects in The Missing Diary of Admiral Richard E. Byrd and The Secret of the Saucers, as presented by Carl Jung in Flying Saucers. Interestingly enough, we even got the word pulse in here, connecting this passage from Plato to both Orichalcum and pulse. Like Coridon's ability, Orichalcum pulse. The way it describes the land's ample pleasure and merriment that is so hard to preserve makes the land sound like it is filled with hidden treasure, like the hidden treasure of Area Zero. Providing charm to a jaded man sounds like the inspiration that Area Zero provided the tragic characters Turo, Sada, and Heath. The reference to plentiful elephants, a relative of the mammoth, even brings to mind The Missing Diary of Admiral Richard E. Byrd, as well as Great Tusk and Iron Tread, being Paradox Pokémon of Donphan, one of the only 3 Pokémon to get past and future Paradox version. Even the mention of carpenters reminds me of not only Ryfort's truth being revealed to her from a carpenter, but also the biblical and Freemasonic connections to carpentry. And it's all wrapped up in a bow with the end of the excerpt basking all these features in the light of the sun, the solar deity that keeps coming up again. Iberian and American Atlantis. Speaking of the sun, Plato also brings us huge tie-ins to the Spanish, Iberian, Central, and South American connections with these games. Many have theorized that Atlantis was actually located in Spain. Check out this article from Time and this one from National Geographic, both about researchers and scientists claiming to find evidence of Atlantis' location possibly being in Spain. Plato himself mentions the Pillars of Heracles when describing the location of Atlantis. These pillars are at the Strait of Gibraltar, which lies between Morocco and Spain. The Pillars of Hercules are also on the official coat of arms of Spain. Many have also theorized that Atlantis was in Central America, and that the Mayans also share the story of Atlantis. The Wikipedia page for Atlantis mentions this a number of times, and even has a whole section about it. Its first mentioning reads,
Contemporary perceptions of Atlantis share roots with Mayanism, which can be traced to the beginning of the modern age, when European imaginations were fueled by their initial encounters with the indigenous peoples of the Americas. From this era sprang apocalyptic and utopian visions that would inspire many subsequent generations of theorists. Most of these interpretations are considered pseudo-history, pseudo-science, or pseudo-archaeology, as they have presented their works as academic or scientific, but lack the standards or criteria.
once again going back to the fact versus fiction theme of the games, and many considering Heath to be an imaginative liar. There are many researchers that the Wikipedia page talks about being shamed for their theories of Atlantis, including the whole segment about Mayanism. It's all very interesting. Really though, if you read the stories of Mesoamerican flood myths like that of the Popol Vuh, they really do thematically sound the same as the story of Atlantis and Scarlet and Violet. There are many of them, but essentially in all of them, a ruinous disaster sets human civilization back to a restart as a punishment for some kind of transgression. They often include their creation gods, like Quetzalcoatl, a feathered serpent. I won't go into any of them specifically, but this Wikipedia page lists a lot of very interesting tales. Plato himself said that the story of Atlantis came from Egypt, and many claim that Egypt also has a different version of the same story of Atlantis and the Popol Vuh inscribed on the wall of the Temple of Edfu. Many people also think that this is false and try to point out differences between the stories, but once again, the story of the wall of the Temple of Edfu really does thematically sound the same as the story of Atlantis, the Popol Vuh, the Great Flood of the Bible, and Scarlet and Violet. It tells the story of the ruinous destruction of an island made by gods, repeatedly flooded with water by a great serpent. So yeah, it's close. I could and would love to eventually do a whole video on this, but for now, I'll stay on the Poké topic at hand. What's interesting to me about this in connection with the games is how it connects to my theory that Coridon and Maridon are references to the serpent in the Garden of Eden, as well as references to both Egyptian and Mayan cultures having feathered serpents throughout their art, mythologies, and specifically their alleged versions of the Atlantis story. Atlantean WW2 Connection. To conclude the portion of this video that is dedicated to Atlantis, let's not forget how Atlantis connects to parts 1, 2, and 3 of this theory, because the stories of Atlantis went on to inspire Madame Blavatsky, He Who Shall Not Be Named, U.S. Navy Admiral Richard E. Byrd, and Carl Jung. The story of Atlantis played a role in the events of World War II, and thus the ruinous disaster that fell upon the land of Japan as described in parts 1 and 2 of this series. The story of Atlantis inspired the expedition described in the missing diary of Admiral Richard E. Byrd and part 1 of this series. And all of this was interpreted by Carl Jung using the ideas of Plato in his book about time machine discs, flying saucers, modern myth of things seen in the sky, which we reviewed in part 3 of this series. Naranja Symposium. Thanks to Plato, not only do we have this huge connection to Scarlet and Violet, the story of Atlantis, but also, you see, there's a Spanish expression, and please excuse my bad pronunciation, as it goes, encontrar tu media naranja. This phrase means to find your half orange, and is a Spanish take on a story from Plato. He held symposiums where many wise men would gather, exchange, and record ideas. This is published as Plato's Symposium. In it, a comedian named Aristophanes tells this fascinating story, which also happens to be in the movie Hedwig and the Angry Inch. The story goes like this.
Human beings, in my opinion, have been entirely unaware of the power of Eros, since if they were aware of it, they would have provided the greatest sanctuaries and altars for him, and would be making him the greatest sacrifices, and not act as they do now when none of this happens to him, though it most certainly should. For Eros is the most philanthropic of gods, a helper of human beings, as well as a physician dealing with an illness the healing of which would result in the greatest happiness for the human race. So I shall try to initiate you into his power, and you will be the teachers of everyone else. But you must first understand human nature and its afflictions. Our nature in the past was not the same as now, but of a different sort. First of all, the races of human beings were 3, not 2 as now, male and female. For there was also a third race that shared in both, a race whose name still remains, though it itself has vanished. For at that time one race was androgynous, and in looks and name it combined both, the male as well as the female. Secondly, the looks of each human being were as a whole round, with back and sides in a circle. And each had 4 arms, and legs equal in number to his arms, and 2 faces alike in all respects on a cylindrical neck. But there was one head for both faces, they were set in opposite directions and 4 ears, and 2 sets of genitals, and all the rest that one might conjecture from this. Each used to walk upright too, just as one does now, in whatever direction he wanted. And whenever he had the impulse to run fast, then just as tumblers with their legs straight out actually move around as they tumble in a circle, so did they, with their 8 limbs as supports, quickly move in a circle. It is for this reason that the races were 3 and of this sort, because the male was in origin the offspring of the sun, the female of the earth, and the race that shared in both, of the moon, since the moon also shares in both. And they themselves were globular, as was their manner of walking, because they were like their parents. Now, they were awesome in their strength and robustness, and they had great and proud thoughts, so they made an attempt on the gods.
Alright, what a wild story we have here. There are many themes and motifs present throughout the games that we've been discussing in this series, including circles and spheres, divine masculine and feminine, and the sun and moon. He goes on about this event, writing,
They attempted to make an ascent into the sky with a view to assaulting the gods. Then Zeus and the other gods deliberated as to what they should do with them, and they were long perplexed. For the gods knew neither how they could kill them and, just as they had struck the giants with lightning, obliterate the race, for, in that case, their own honors and sacrifices from human beings would vanish, nor how they could allow them to continue to behave licentiously. Then Zeus fought hard and says, in my own opinion, he said, I have a device whereby human beings would continue to exist and at the same time, having become weaker, would stop their licentiousness. I shall now cut each of them in 2, he said, and they will be both weaker and more useful to us through the increase in their numbers, and they will walk upright on 2 legs. But if they are thought to behave licentiously still, and are unwilling to keep quiet, then I shall cut them again in 2, he said, so that they will go hopping on 1 leg. As soon as he said this, he began to cut human beings in 2, just like those who cut sorb apples in preparation for pickling, or those who cut eggs with hairs.
So here we got divine beings interacting with humans. Humans trying to travel or ascend off the planet. The divine beings deeming human advancement has gone too far. And as we will continue to see, some kind of human splitting event that altered and weakened humanity. A reference to Zeus's lightning bolt, which brings to mind Miraidon, his special abilities, and Pikachu. We also got the line that directly ties all of this to fruit, and the fruit used is apples, bringing to mind the Teal Mask DLC with its summer festival, candy apples, and the new Pokémon, Diplin.
When its nature was cut in 2, each desiring its own half came together, and throwing their arms around one another and entangling themselves with one another in their desire to grow together, they began to die off due to hunger and the rest of their inactivity, because they were unwilling to do anything apart from one another. And whenever one of the halves did die and the other was left, the one that was left tried to seek out another and entangle itself with that, whether it met the half of the whole woman, and that is what we now call a woman, or of a man. And so they continued to perish. But Zeus took pity on them and supplies another device.
Aristophanes explains that the device Zeus was referring to was to change the way that humans procreate, allowing for intercourse and romantic love between humans. The description for this biology change is odd and quite graphic. The change in procreation brings to mind the stories of the Garden of Eden, with higher forces striking down the advancement of humanity, like the stories of Atlantis and the Popol Vuh. He goes on to explain,
So it is really from such early times that human beings have had, inborn in themselves, eros for one another, eros, the bringer together of their ancient nature, who tries to make one out of two and to heal their human nature. Each of us, then, is a token of a human being, because we are sliced like fillets of soul, two out of one, and so each is always in search of his own token.
the use of the word token again reminds one of Gimmighoul and the Tarot Suite, Pentacles, which is also referred to as coins. And we're just going to skip over the next portion of text as Aristophanes goes into many, let's say, bizarre and controversial claims about lesbians, men who lie with men, and even of heterosexuals. Aristophanes then wraps it up with this.
This was our ancient nature, and we were wholes. So love is the name for the desire and pursuit of the whole. And previously, as I say, we were one. But now through our injustice we have been dispersed by the god, just as the Arcadians were dispersed by the Spartans. There is the fear, then, that if we are not orderly in our behavior to the gods, we shall be split again and go around like those who are modeled in relief on stele, soared through our nostrils, like dice. For this reason, every real man must be exhorted to be pious toward the gods in all his acts, so that we may avoid the one result and get the other, as Eros is our guide and general. Let no one act contrary to Eros.
So the moral of the story is the power of love. If one seeks to make themselves whole by finding their other half in someone else, the failure to do so can result in one's own death. If one succeeds in finding their other half, it can be their heaven on earth and in the afterlife, their paradise, their hidden treasure. This reminds one not only of the whole treasure-seeking aspect of Pokémon Scarlet and Violet's story, but also of the main storyline. There's Sada and Turo, who were apparently in love and procreated, resulting in Arven. Clearly, their union did not go well, and ended with disastrous results for the professors. Then there's Arven and his Mabasti. Arven's quest is for the love of his partner, Mabasti. This is the part where I cry. Like Heath's quest revolved around his Cyclizar. As a funny side note, I could not believe that all of these ancient wise men were sitting around in Plato's Symposium and making gay jokes. Aristophanes literally makes a joke implying that two of the men there are gay with each other. Could not believe how much and how little has changed. And I couldn't believe this whole story had an explanation for being gay, lesbian, and gender stuff. But yes, just as Carl Jung and Plato believe in the theory of forms and archetypes, where forms like spheres and circles are repeated throughout nature, fruit forms are often similar, spherical imitations of each other. What is an apple in the land of Kitakami can share universal qualities with a blueberry in Unova, an orange in Paldea, or even grapes. And yes, in this case, the Spanish phrase did compare apples and oranges, because this story is where we get the Spanish phrase in contrar to media naranja, Apollonian orange and Dionysian grapes. Throughout this theory I'm presenting, there have been so many dualities. I've outlined many of them before and will do so more thoroughly in the conclusion of the series, but to mention just a few: past and future, fact and fiction, good and bad, and oranges and grapes. I may have explained inspirations for the symbolism of fruit in general, and many references made by the orange specifically, but what about the grapes? Interestingly enough, Plato's books have been published with grapes in the illustrations, but on a deeper level, there is a very intentional specific reason for oranges and grapes to be chosen. During the ancient Greek times of Plato, there was a social divide, but instead instead of red versus blue, it was orange versus purple, in the sense that there were two main opposing followings, one of Apollo and one of Dionysus. Oranges, as orange spheres, have consistently been associated with the sun and its Greek god Apollo, while the Greek god Dionysus has always been associated with wine and grapes. Plato had to navigate this in his works, with some perceiving his stance as fairly neutral, and many others coming away thinking he preferred an Apollonian perspective. People went on to celebrate the birthday of Apollo as the birthday of Plato, and legends were even told about Plato being born by the union between Apollo and his virgin mother. Not only was it a huge cultural divide during his ancient times, but people all the way up to today have studied and debated this subject. I was looking into all of this when I got a comment on my last YouTube video, the previous part of this series about Carl Jung. Thank you so much for this comment. This is only one line from the comment, which is longer, super insightful, and I suggest everyone watching reads it. It tipped me off to a book by Friedrich Nietzsche called The Birth of Tragedy, which, in reference to Plato's theory of forms,
introduces an intellectual dichotomy between the Dionysian and the Apollonian. Very loosely, reality as disordered and indifferentiated by forms versus reality as ordered and differentiated by forms.
The book is very interesting and dark, but there are a few pages that explain this dichotomy between the Apollonian and Dionysian in a way that relates very specifically to many of the themes of Scarlet and Violet, including dreams and the imagination. This passage also talks about the paradoxical aspect of an appearance, which not only references Plato, as Nietzsche does many times throughout the book, but also is spoken of by Carl Jung and a part of the inspiration for Paradox Pokémon and the Tarot crystals, with their light reflecting quality. Okay, here we go. Nietzsche me.
Concerning this naive artist, the analogy of dreams will enlighten us to some extent. When we realize to ourselves the dreamer, as in the midst of the illusion of the dream world and without disturbing it, he calls out to himself, "It is a dream, I will dream on." When we must thence infer a deep inner joy in dream contemplation. When, on the other hand, to be at all able to dream with this inner joy in contemplation, we must have completely forgotten the day and its terrible obtrusiveness, we may, under the direction of the dream reading Apollo, interpret all these phenomena to ourselves somewhat as follows. Though it is certain that of the two halves of life, the waking and the dreaming, the former appeals to us as by far the more preferred, important, excellent, and worthy of being lived. Indeed, as that which alone is lived. Yet, with reference to that mysterious ground of our being of which we are the phenomenon, I should, paradoxical as it may seem, be inclined to maintain the very opposite estimate of the value of dream life. For the more clearly I perceive in nature those all-powerful art impulses, and in them a fervent longing for appearance, for redemption through appearance, the more I feel myself driven to the metaphysical assumption that the verily existent and primordial unity, as the eternally suffering and self-contradictory, requires the rapturous vision, the joyful appearance, for its continuous salvation. Which appearance we, who are completely wrapped in it and composed of it, must regard as the verily non-existent, i.e., as a perpetual unfolding in time, space, and causality, in other words, as empiric reality. If we therefore waive the consideration of our own reality for the present, if we conceive our empiric existence, and that of the world generally, as a representation of the primordial unity generated every moment, we shall then have to regard the dream as an appearance of appearance, hence as a still higher gratification of the primordial desire for appearance. It is for this same reason that the innermost heart of nature experiences that indescribable joy in the naive artist and in the naive work of art, which is likewise only an appearance of appearance. In a symbolic painting, Raphael, himself one of these immortal naive ones, has represented to us this depotentiating of appearance to appearance. the primordial process of the naive artist and at the same time of Apollonian culture.
Whew, okay, I know. It's a lot. I tried to take as much out as I could, but he makes very long-winded points. The dream illusion, its paradoxical and self-contradictory aspect of appearance spoken of here by Nietzsche, but also by Carl Jung and Plato, is inspiration for both paradox Pokémon, imitating their previous versions, and terrestrial forms of Pokémon imitating a different typing, using the light-reflecting Terra crystals to create the illusion. On the next page, he continues on this point with another passage with many parallels. This excerpt even explains additional inspiration behind the Titan Pokémon and what their name and qualities are referencing. The Titans of Greek mythology, who represent an older, more Dionysian point of view than the now dominant Apollonian perspective. As he's about to explain, according to Nietzsche, civilization goes through cycles between being more Dionysian and Apollonian, each one building upon the last. This concept parallels these same themes behind the story of Atlantis, the Great Flood, the Temple of Edfu, and the Popol Vuh, as we've been discussing. It even refers to these cyclical changes symbolically as floods.
This apotheosis of individuation, if it be at all conceived as imperative and laying down precepts, knows but one law of the individual, i.e., the observance of the boundaries of the individual measure in the Hellenic sense. Apollo, as ethical deity, demands due proportion of his disciples, and that this may be observed, he demands self-knowledge. And thus, parallel to the aesthetic necessity for beauty, there run the demands know thyself and not too much, while presumption and undueness are regarded as the truly hostile demons of the non-Apollonian sphere, hence as characteristics of the pre-Apollonian age, that of the Titans, and of the extra-Apollonian world, that of the barbarians. Because of his Titan-like love for man, Prometheus had to be torn to pieces by vultures. Because of his excessive wisdom, which solved the riddle of the Sphinx, Oedipus had to plunge into a bewildering vortex of monstrous crimes. Thus did the Delphic god interpret the Grecian past. So also, the effects wrought by the Dionysian appeared titanic and barbaric to the Apollonian Greek, while at the same time he could not conceal from himself that he too was inwardly related to these overthrown titans and heroes. Indeed, he had to recognize still more than this. His entire existence, with all its beauty and moderation, rested on a hidden substratum of suffering and of knowledge, which was again disclosed to him by the Dionysian. And lo, Apollo could not live without Dionysus. The Titanic and the barbaric were in the end not less necessary than the Apollonian. And now let us imagine to ourselves how the ecstatic tone of the Dionysian festival sounded in ever more luring and bewitching strains into this artificially confined world built on appearance and moderation. How in these strains all the undueness of nature, in joy, sorrow, and knowledge, even to the trance-piercing shriek, became audible. Let us ask ourselves what meaning could be attached to the psalmodizing artist of Apollo, with a phantom harp sound, as compared with this demonic folk song. And thus, wherever the Dionysian prevailed, the Apollonian was routed and annihilated. But it is quite as certain that, where the first assault was successfully withstood, the authority and majesty of the Delphic god exhibited itself as more rigid and menacing than ever. Up to this point, we have enlarged upon the observation made at the beginning of this essay. How the Dionysian and the Apollonian, in ever new births succeeding and mutually augmenting one another, controlled the Hellenic genius. How from out the age of bronze, with its Titan struggles and rigorous folk philosophy, the Homeric world develops under the fostering sway of the Apollonian impulse to beauty. How this naive splendor is again overwhelmed by the inbursting flood of the Dionysian, and how against this new power the Apollonian rises.
There's so much to unpack here. I think I summarized the connections mostly before the excerpt, but one note to add would be the reference to the Dionysian festival with its demonic folk song, which reminds me of the Teal Mask DLC, with its festival and demonic, dark-typed ogre Pokémon, Ogrepon. So the festival theme ties in here to the Platonic and Greek aspects of this theory with the Dionysian connection. Also, another note that I think is very important and we'll be exploring more once the game is complete and I make my final conclusions, is how this Apollonian and Dionysian dichotomy plays into the plot of Scarlet and Violet, how it plays into the story of the professors and the ethical choices between good and bad that we make and can cause completely parallel universes. I think if you follow this whole theory I'm putting forth in the series, a lot of the connections are pretty much laid out already. However, we don't know how the story will end yet. I have not yet played the last part of the DLC, so I don't know the full story yet, so there will be more to say there soon in my next video concluding the series. If you made it this far and you want to help me spread these ideas, subscribe to stay updated on my theory after the game concludes, and for many more theories on the arcane, esoteric, and occult throughout the arts and sciences. Also, that's the end of my part about Nietzsche and his thoughts on Plato, so let me know what you think of the parallels in the comments. It's thanks to a comment that this book even got on my radar, and I truly appreciate every one of the comments. I did not read the whole book, The Birth of Tragedy, so there could be many more connections. It's pretty fascinating stuff. The Demiurge. While we're still on the topic of higher beings thwarting human advancement, the Demiurge must be mentioned. The Demiurge is a being that is said to have created our physical universe. Plato refers to the Demiurge frequently in Timaeus, and also throughout his works. Some liken this to a creator god, while others think of this being as evil and blame it for many of the mythical events of God smiting humankind in great floods and cataclysms. There's a lot more to it, but for the sake of this video, I'm keeping it simple and related to Pokémon. The Wikipedia page for the Demiurge has a quote about this dual nature, stating,
In the arch-dualist ideology of the various Gnostic systems, the material universe is evil, while the non-material world is good. According to some strains of Gnosticism, the Demiurge is malevolent, as it is linked to the material world. In others, including the teaching of Valentinus, the Demiurge is simply ignorant or misguided.
Also, in some sects, the Demiurge is considered to be a fiery, burning man with the face of a lion and the body of a snake. And if you check out illustrations of this form, they're reminiscent of the serpent-like designs of Coridon and Meridon. Biblical parallels. Many have made a distinction between the Demiurge and the devil, but there are also many schools of thought that have considered the Demiurge and the devil to be one and the same. There's a whole section about the Demiurge's parallels with the devil on its Wikipedia page. The Bible and Christianity were developed after Plato's time, but many concepts from previous pagan religions bled over into Christianity, and many have discussed their overlap since its creation. So, of course, Plato doesn't make any direct references to the Bible, which came after his time. However, his story of gods battling before the flood of the technologically advanced paradise-like civilization of fruits and hubris, Atlantis, his story of Zeus using his lightning bolt to split the reproductive system of humans in half like apples when they were building towards the sky in the Symposium, and his stories of the Demiurge fashioning the material world and civilizations as he sees fit, all parallel the stories of Adam and Eve, the forbidden fruit, the Garden of Eden, the Great Flood, and the Book of Revelation. Carl Jung had more to say about these biblical correlations, which we reviewed and compared to Scarlet and Violet in the last part of this series. And after seeing the trailer for the Indigo Disc, I'm sure I'll have more to say about these biblical parallels in the conclusion of this series and after I play through the DLC. But yeah, Plato's concept of the Demiurge evolved into the devil according to some. And outside of what we reviewed in the last part of this series, the devil's name comes up in some other surprising and interesting Scarlet and Violet related places too. Infrared to ultraviolet rainbow books. Believe it or not, when looking up definitions for red book online, many results come up about Carl Jung's red book from the last part of the series, but we also get the devil included often in definitions. The top definition is typically
a book, often bound with a red cover, or online equivalent that is an official or canonical collection of data, regulations, or writings.
But a great deal of websites with a definition for red book list its second definition as
a book supposedly belonging to the devil and containing the signatures of those in league with him.
or
A book considered to be devilish or demonic in nature.
okay, frightening. Other definitions include
An official British register bound in red.
and
British government publication bound in red, especially the Treasury's annual forecast of revenue, expenditure, growth, and inflation.
here we have the word treasure popping up again, invoking the hunt for treasure that the Academies send their students on in Paldea, the hidden treasure of Area Zero, and Gimmighoul. Other notable red books from the top of my Google search include supposedly one of the most widely produced books of all time is The Little Red Book, a Chinese communist book that is huge in China and probably pretty relevant to the Japanese creators of Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. And guess what else? No way I could have guessed this. Speaking of China and the theory I'm presenting in this series, Antarctica is where much of the content from the first and second part of this series relating to World War II takes place, and He Who Shall Not Be Named also published his most famous book in red. But regarding China and Antarctica, there's a robotic observatory of domes called Plato in Antarctica. This observatory is completely automated and robotic, performing experiments year-round. The observatory is located in the Chinese Kunlun Inland Station at Dome A, and it's funded by many governments and institutions, with many from China. This article from the New York Times explains that Americans were, and I quote, piggybacking on the Chinese. The idea of a robot operating research alone in a dangerous zone isn't new to us because it's straight out of Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. It's just like the AI professors in Scarlet and Violet ending up alone researching in the dangerous land of Area Zero. The reason why this observatory is robotic and in Antarctica is because of the cold weather, lack of atmospheric turbulence, long night skies, but also most relevantly because of infrared windows with exceptional terahertz transparency, like the reference to the spectrum of visible light that the titles Scarlet and Violet seem to be referring to, and teracrystals. Additional sources presented on the left of the screen say terahertz and far infrared windows opened at Dome A, Antarctica, and exceptional terahertz transparency and stability above Dome A, Antarctica. It's actually a pretty big, relevant topic in the scientific community that a lot of people are talking about. There are many ways that we could advance from the information we receive from the technology at these bases, relating to the themes throughout the theory of this series about the advancement of human technology. In reference to Dome A, the article from the New York Times says one of its goals is to
Be a cosmological workhorse, helping to investigate the dark energy that is speeding the expansion of the universe.
This sounds like it's right out of the story Carl Jung references in Flying Saucers, called The Black Cloud. It also quotes a scientist who said,
The point of the new observatory was not to compete with the space program, but rather to grab low-hanging fruit.
and I just had to mention the low-hanging fruit that was that fruit reference there. Also, as it mentions 3 times, in order to even establish this Plato observatory, multiple expeditions had to have been made, like the expeditions of Heath, the professors, and to Antarctica with Admiral Richard E. Byrd and He Who Shall Not Be Named, where they supposedly encountered extraterrestrial advanced life in the form of discs, as reviewed in the first 2 parts of this series. Oh, and the article has a quote from another scientist who went on one of these expeditions, in which he says,
Our food is slightly worse than at home, but I think it's okay. Rice or noodle, choice of one of 2 dishes.
which just kind of reminded me of gym leader Larry's favorite dish, which, spoiler alert, is rice balls prepared in a certain way. This scientist kind of reminds me of Larry Moore when he goes on to half complain about the expedition, saying,
Today is my first time sitting in the tractor and listening to music and looking around. How beautiful the snow, how wide, wonderful changes of the sun. It is a different feeling compared to listening to the songs at home.
which is weirdly synchronistic with the rest of our repeating motifs when it mentions the joy of the sun and the territory being exceptional in a way like Area Zero or Atlantis. But more importantly, another goal for this research base in Antarctica, Plato, is to search for exoplanets, or a planet that orbits a star outside its solar system, which can be potentially habitable. The idea of life existing beyond our planet or our ability to travel through space and time has been popping up all throughout the theory presented in this series, as it is all throughout the games of Scarlet and Violet. The subjects from World War II in parts 1 and 2 of this series are connected to the subjects of Plato in this part of the series in a way that is fully explained by Carl Jung in his book about flying discs, which we reviewed in part 3 of this series. The flying discs of World War II were said to be time travel devices as well, like the time machine the AI professors created with the disc Pokémon. Also, space traveling aliens are mentioned throughout the games, like Iron Tread's Scarlet entry claiming it was sent to this planet by aliens, or Iron Moth's claiming it is a UFO sent to observe humanity, like we're using infrared windows at this Plato observatory to look for signs of planets that can host light. But wait, there's more. I know, it's all too much. But guess what? I couldn't make this up if I tried, but there's yet another self-automated device on a mission to do research on exoplanets named Plato, and this time it's a spacecraft. The planetary transits and oscillations of stars, or Plato spacecraft, is set to launch in 2026 to look for habitable Earth-like planets where we could survive or aliens may be living. The goal is also to study seismic activity in stars, which could help us determine the age of stars and potentially destructive solar events. And the last robotic Plato project we went over also shares the goal of not only exoplanets, but also determining the age of stars. This spacecraft, Plato, is part of a space science and space exploration mission called Cosmic Vision, connecting again to our tropes of the spectrum of visible light, vision and light in relation to the cosmos itself. And get this, the results of the first phase of the Plato spacecraft mission has been published in a study report. The publication has been given a title. That title is, have you guessed it yet? The Red Book. I'm done. And yet, I'm not. At this point, I know all of these Red Book parallels, including Plato's name, themes of treasure and technology, space travel, AI, dangerous bases, and Faust could all be written off as coincidences or synchronicities because all of these things could just be related intrinsically. However, I would suggest that the connections are much more direct than that. These things are all very directly referencing each other, and all of this technological advancement is directly referenced by all of the myths of Atlantis from Plato, the Egyptian myth at the Temple of Edfu, the Mayan Popol Vuh, and later by the Bible with the Garden of Eden, the Tower of Babel, and the Great Flood. I'm done, and yet I'm not. Very much not. I made another discovery about red books, thanks to someone I love who remembered a line from the movie Hackers when I was talking about making this video. This is crazy. When I read this, I was so shooketh. Listen to this part from the script of the movie Hackers, provided with screenshots and an AI audio that is the accurate script, unlike the AI-generated subtitles in the screenshots.
Dade and Serial acknowledge each other.
Anyways, guys, listen to me. I'm in this computer, right? So I'm looking around.
Do you bring those Crayola books? Oh yeah, Technicolor Rainbow.
Serial brings a book out of his bag.
Green one.
What is that? Let me see. What are these?
International Unix environments.
Serial pulls out another book.
Luscious orange.
Serial hands the orange book to Freak.
Computer security criteria, Dodge standards.
Another book comes out.
The pink shirt book, Guide to IBM PCs. So called due to the nasty pink shirt the guy wears on the cover.
Another one.
What's that?
Devil book, the Unix Bible.
Another one.
What's that?
Dragon book, compiler design.
Serial brings out a large red book.
Oh yeah, what's that?
The Red Book, NSA Trusted Networks. otherwise known as the ugly red book that won't fit on a shelf.
By now, Freak has made a pile of the books, and the red book looks wholly out of place on the top of the pile.
Anyway, guys, come on. I'm in this computer, right? So I'm looking around, throwing commands at it. I don't know where it is or what it does or anything. It's like choice. It's just beautiful, okay. Like 4 hours I'm just messing around in there. Finally I figure out that it's a bank. Right, okay. So it's a bank. So, this morning, I look in the paper. Some cash machine in Lightbumsville, Idaho, spits out $700 into the middle of the street.
That's kinda cool.
That was me. I did that.
You did this from your house.
Joey takes a drag from his cigarette and just nods, with a big grin on his face.
What are you, stoned or stupid? You don't hack a bank across state lines from your house. You'll get nailed by the FBI. Where are your brains? In your ass. Don't you know anything? Stupid, man. It's universally stupid.
You guys always think I should know everything, and you never tell me anything. Am I right?
All right, what are the 3 most commonly used passwords?
Love, secret, and sex, but not in that order, necessarily, right?
Yeah, but don't forget God. System operators love to use God. It's that whole male ego thing. Look, you want to be elite. You gotta do a righteous hack. None of this accidental shit. Oh yeah, you want a seriously righteous hack. You score one of those Gibsons, man. You know, supercomputers they use to do physics, and look for oil and stuff. Ain't no way, man, security's too tight. The big iron.
Maybe, but if I were gonna hack some heavy metal, I'd work my way back through some low security and try the back door.
Joey's room. Night. Joey is hacking a Gibson. He gets in, using God as a password.
God, love, technology, a dragon book, a devil book, the red book, and male ego. Also, the story revolves around a moral quandary. The character is using technology to do something wrong, stealing from others. But the other characters don't criticize his morality, only his intelligence. And in the end, the answer to the most used passwords is love, secret, and sex. But not necessarily in that order, just like the power of Eros, the god of desire, in Plato's Symposium. They even emphasize the red book in particular. I almost fell out of my seat when I read the line, otherwise known as the ugly red book that won't fit on the shelf. That is literally the way the important books look in the libraries of the Academies of Paldea, and how you can find the Scarlet book and Violet book in the games. Couldn't believe it. Are we in the Poke world now? The craziest part is that it's true, or at least the part about the red book is. It's from the Rainbow series, or Rainbow Books, which lay out computer security standards and guidelines published by the U.S. Department of Defense Computer Security Center. All very technology themed. Check it out. There's even a Wikipedia page for it with the red, orange, and violet books listed as such. But it doesn't stop there. Oh no. Because this convention of creating a series of protocols and naming them after the colors of the rainbow is a phenomenon existing around the world. There are the colored book protocols of the United Kingdom. There are also rainbow books for CD format specifications. A CD is a compact disc, similar to the disc Pokémon. It's also outdated technology. Let me know in the comments if you're old enough to remember when people were actually using CDs. This series of books contains not only a red book and purple book, but also a scarlet book specifically. All these rainbow books got me thinking about the children's show Reading Rainbow and the association of knowledge with light and fire. The idea of books being named after the colors in the visible spectrum of light seems to also be referenced by the names of the books and games themselves, Scarlet and Violet, with infrared light and ultraviolet light being the portions of the spectrum of light just beyond what humans have been coded to be able to see. Because most of the rainbow books are books defining protocols, it also brings to mind the Paradise Protection Protocol that the mad scientist's artificial intelligence initiates during the climax of the game's events. Speaking of cyber protocols, the cyber world and cyber culture Funnily enough, when I searched the words Plato and orange together on Google, the results I got were mostly about this book called The Friendly Orange Glow, the untold story of the Plato system and the dawn of cyberculture. The story behind the book is oddly relevant as it also seems to be about themes similar to the games and the specific historical references they make. Basically, the book details the story of a group of visionary engineers and designers who developed a computer system that was called Plato and supposedly led to our Earth timeline's first ever cyberculture.
They were among the first to identify and also realize the potential and scope of the social interconnectivity of computers, well before the creation of the Internet. Plato was the foundational model for every online community that was to follow in its footsteps.
Also, its main title is Friendly Orange Glow, which I know is not a direct reference, but it almost seems synchronistic to the Iberian connection with the Spanish phrase about oranges, which came from Plato's Symposium. So many things connecting. Just goes to show how influential Plato is. Platonic Allegories in Pokémon Academies. Now that we've had a detour into many topics that are related to Plato without directly sourcing his material, let's return to Plato's own writings to explain the rest of the plot of Scarlet and Violet. Let's go to his most famous allegory, that of the cave, from his most famous dialogue, The Republic. This connects to what we were just talking about regarding the rainbow books, the spectrum of visible light between infrared and ultraviolet, and what we have continuously been talking about with the themes of lightning, light, fire, and the sun. But that's not all. There's more. The allegory of the sun, the simile of the divided line, and the allegory of the cave together from books 6 and 7 of the Republic hold more inspiration for the hidden treasure of Area Zero, Gimighoul, the Academies, the various caves of Paldea, the screens with the professors near the end of the plot, the phantom memory, the subconscious imaginative state of Heath and the professors, the reoccurring themes of moral decisions, numbers, and sacred geometry. On top of that, there are topics from Scarlet and Violet that I have not yet discussed. It's crazy how if you keep following the path, more elements from Scarlet and Violet keep coming to the surface, and eventually it seems as if every main element from Scarlet and Violet can be explained in the theory I'm presenting in this series. These allegories from Plato also bring us all new, never-before discussed theories as to the inspiration for Team Star, and even an explanation for why this heavy educational content is being put into a children's game. I mean, I've never heard anyone talking about Plato in connection with Scarlet and Violet before, but I digress. I'm going to go through books 6 and 7 sequentially for the most part, reviewing only the passages that have relevance to Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Book 6 of the Republic starts by setting up the purpose of the topic at hand. Socrates and Glaucon are creating their ideal government and city, and for this, they require a process to select its ruler. It is said that rulership should be a prize reward given only to those who can endure ruinous situations and any twist of fortune.
The selection of rulers is something we need to tackle more or less from square one. What we said, if you remember, was that they must prove their patriotism by being tested in the fire of pleasure and pain. It must be clear that they will not surrender their convictions through hardship, fear, or any other twist of fortune. Those who fail the test must be disqualified, while those who emerge pure, like gold tested in the fire, should be appointed rulers and given rewards and prizes both in their lifetimes and after their deaths.
The idea of a test of rulership requiring a test of pain brings to mind the king from Ryfort's historical myth, with the ruinous Pokémon and the disasters they caused. The talk of gold, prizes, and rewards shares its themes with what the king was seeking, the hidden treasure of Area Zero, and all the relevant myths we've discussed of lush, abundant, paradise-like lands. Additionally, I can't help but think of Gimighoul again with the mentioning of gold. This all may seem coincidental, but I assure you the more we get into this, the more it seems Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are directly referencing this text specifically. This next part has a very interesting explanation for the symbolism and inherent qualities of the forms of the sun, fire, light, sight, vision, and the eye.
Which of our faculties do we use to see the things we see?
Our sight,
He said,
and our hearing for the things we hear, and our other senses for everything we perceive.
Of course. Have you ever noticed, I asked, how much more extravagantly the creator of the senses has made the power of seeing and being seen than the other senses?
No, I haven't.
Look at it this way. For hearing to hear and sound to be heard, do they need some other class of thing as well? Without this third thing, will hearing fail to hear and sound fail to be heard?
No, they don't need any other class of thing.
He said, I suspect that many other faculties, I won't say all of them, have no need for any further thing of this sort. Can you think of any?
No, I can't.
How about the faculty of sight and the thing which is seen? Has it ever struck you that those do need something of this sort?
How do you mean?
If there is sight in the eyes, and its possessor is trying to make use of it, you surely realize that even in the presence of color, sight will see nothing, and the colors will remain unseen, unless one further thing joins them, a third sort of thing which exists for precisely this purpose.
What thing do you mean?
The thing you call light.
True?
He said, in that case, because it involves a third thing of this important character, the link between the faculty of sight and the ability to be seen is something more valuable than the links between the other faculties and their objects. Unless, of course, light has no value.
Well, it certainly does have a value.
Which of the heavenly gods, then, do you take to be the agent responsible for this? Whose is the light which best enables our faculty of sight to see, and the things which are seen to be seen?
The one you or anyone else would take to be responsible?
He said.
The one you're asking about is obviously the sun.
Now, do you agree with me about the natural relationship of sight to this god?
What are you saying about it?
Sight is not the sun, neither sight itself, nor the place in which it occurs, and which we call the eye.
No, it isn't.
But of all the organs of perception, I would say, the eye is the most sun-like.
Much the most.
So the power which it has the ability to see it receives from the sun, as a kind of grant from an overflowing treasury.
Exactly.
We've already reviewed how the themes of sight, vision, light, fire, and the sun are present throughout Scarlet and Ultraviolet, but here we have it directly linked to the word treasury, like the hidden treasure of Area Zero and all the other themes of treasures throughout these references. We have another example of the theory of forms in this last excerpt, but there's also this very interesting distinction between sight and the other senses, with sight being the only one requiring light to be perceived. The eye is a fairly new concept for this video series, but the way that it relates can be inferred through all of the symbolism of spheres, circles, suns, fire, and light. Also, besides the obvious reasons why the eye would be associated with vision and light, this symbology has had a lot of significance throughout culture. Throughout time, human cultures across the globe have always had eye symbolism, almost as commonly as there is solar symbolism, and they are often paired together, like the all-seeing eye atop the pyramid of the American dollar bill. In Hebrew, the 16th letter, called ayin, has connections to all of these motifs. I am not an expert in Hebrew, so feel free to correct me on anything I get wrong. I'll show my sources on the left of the screen, as usual. From my understanding, the name of the letter was derived from a word meaning eye, which was derived from a hieroglyph of an eye. So in this context, the name of the letter ayin means eye, to see, and by extension, to understand and obey. It is connected to the divine light. Like the left and right eyes of Egyptian schools of thought, the binary nature of the eyes holds a Kabbalistic meaning of one being good and one being evil. This reflects the dualistic and moral themes we've been reviewing throughout this series in relation to Scarlet and Violet. It is also part of the reason why this letter has been associated with Lucifer, who has also been discussed throughout this series as various figures considered both of good and of bad. Ayin is also a Hebrew word for nothingness, which in contrast to yesh, or existence, has importance in Kabbalah as another dichotomy. And once again, it's about existence versus non-existence, real versus imaginary, conscious versus subconscious, physical versus conceptually divine. This is what Plato, Carl Jung, Nietzsche, and the Pokémon creators are all discussing. Another thing, you guys, This is huge. Coincidentally, or perhaps cosmically non-coincidentally, another Iberian connection comes to light because it is a Spanish rabbi who published the foundational text for the Kabbalah in Spain. The Zohar, the foundational work of Kabbalah, puts extra emphasis on the word ayin, relating to the internal psychological experience of being close to God, and the contemplative perception of paradoxical yesh ayin divine panentheism. We have the word paradox coming up again, psychological experiences like Heath's, as explained by Carl Jung, and it's all coming out of Spain, and in relation to all these mythological, historical, and spiritual accounts. A little bit of a side note away from Plato's specific work there, but it is very related, important, and worthy of more exploration in a future video, I think. Let me know what you think in the comments. Back to the Republic.
Just as in our example, it is correct to think of light and vision as sun-like, but incorrect to think that they are the sun. In the same way here, it is correct to think of knowledge and truth as good-like, but incorrect to think that either of them is the good. The good is something to be prized even more highly.
Here, we have an elaboration on the distinction between something that has a characteristic and that characteristic itself. It's made clear that the good can be included in light, vision, the sun, knowledge, and truth, but it is a form of its own that is superior to the rest. Now on to Book 7, where Plato sets up the allegory of the cave right from the start.
If we're thinking about the effect of education or the lack of it on our nature, there's another comparison we can make. Picture human beings living in some sort of underground cave dwelling, with an entrance which is long, as wide as the cave, and open to the light. Here they live, from earliest childhood, with their legs and necks in chains, so that they have to stay where they are, looking only ahead of them, prevented by the chains from turning their heads. They have light from a distant fire, which is burning behind them and above them. Between the fire and the prisoners, at a higher level than them, is a path along which you must picture a low wall that has been built, like the screen which hides people when they are giving a puppet show, and above which they make the puppets appear.
Much like the Academies of Paldea, Plato, through this dialogue between Socrates and Glaucon, is making a point about education and the best way to educate our future leaders. He describes an underground cave setting with an entrance which is long, as wide as the cave, and open to the light, just like Area Zero. Plus, there are many more caves all throughout the games. Light and fire are of course consistent themes, and we have screens, like the screens you communicate with the professors on, and the stories from Carl Jung's Flying Saucers. Plato goes on to describe how disorienting it would be to see the light and to break out of a reality illusion.
Think what their release from their chains and the cure for their ignorance would be like. Because of the glare, he'd be unable to see the things whose shadows he used to see before. Don't you think he'd be confused? Wouldn't he believe the things he saw before to be more true than what was being pointed out to him now?
This confused, shadowy state reminds me of Heath's description of coming into contact with the disc Pokémon as a dreamlike experience, another reoccurring motif. And now, the subject of this allegory makes the connection between the shadows, the light, and the fire with the sun.
He would work out that it was the sun which caused the seasons and the years, which governed everything in the visible realm, and which was in one way or another responsible for everything they used to see.
The next 4 pages discuss the true nature of education and what it really strives to do. They make the case that the capacity for knowledge can't be given to a student, and instead the student must have their capacity for knowledge pointed in the right direction. I won't go through all 4 pages, but here are 2 excerpts of particular importance.
Well, I said, if it's true, there's one conclusion we can avoid. Education is not what some people proclaim it to be. What they say, roughly speaking, is that they are able to put knowledge into souls where none was before, like putting sight into eyes which were blind.
Yes, that is what they say.
Whereas our present account indicates that this capacity in every soul, this instrument by means of which each person learns, is like an eye which can only be turned away from the darkness and towards the light by turning the whole body. The entire soul has to turn with it, away from what is coming to be, until it is able to bear the sight of what is, and in particular the brightest part of it. This is the part we call the good, isn't it?
Yes.
Education, then, I said, would be the art of directing this instrument, of finding the easiest and most effective way of turning it round. Not the art of putting the power of sight into it, but the art which assumes it possesses this power, albeit incorrectly aligned, and looking in the wrong direction, and contrives to make it look in the right direction.
Yes.
He said,
It looks as if that is what education is.
We're not dealing here, by the looks of it, with something like the spin of a coin, but with the turning of a soul away from that day which is a kind of night, and towards the true day which is the ascent to what is, and which we shall say is true philosophy.
Exactly.
Does that mean we should ask ourselves which subject of study has the power to do this?
Yes, of course.
Overall, this passage thematically connects with a lot of the storyline having to do with the Academies trying to inspire their students and resolve the conflict with Team Star, influencing students not to go to class. The themes of the ascent out of night into true day also reflects back to the professors going in the opposite direction, descending into madness and death. Not only are we discussing schooling students, but he also mentions the flip of a coin, like Gimmighoul, and when he denounces that educators can put knowledge into souls where none was before, it brings to mind Ryfort's comments in class.
This very academy where you're now filling your young minds with knowledge.
That last bit from Plato's Republic left off asking which subjects they can teach their students in order to steer their souls towards true knowledge. There's this whole long explanation involving imagining a world where all you know is the fingers on your hand, but basically the point they are trying to make is that curiosity to investigate a subject is aroused when a paradox of opposites is present. Once again, giving us dualism, but this also mimics what Carl Jung was saying about the devil being in the details and how you don't notice an illusion until you see discrepancies in its details.
If some sort of contradiction of it is always seen at the same time, so that it seems to be no more the one than its opposite, then there would be a need for someone to make a decision about it. In a case like this, the soul within him would be driven in its confusion to start searching. It would arouse the capacity for reflection within itself, and ask it what the one itself actually was. In this way, studying the one would be one of those things which lead and direct us towards the contemplation of what is.
Right. And seeing the one does have exactly this effect. After all, we can see the same thing at one and the same time, both as one and also as an infinite number.
Well, if this is true of the one, I said, is it not also true of number in general?
Yes, of course.
And arithmetic and the theory of number are exclusively concerned with number.
Absolutely.
Clearly, then, the study of number is conducive to truth.
To a remarkable degree.
Take up arithmetical reasoning and practice it not as a hobby, but until they reach the contemplation of the nature of numbers by means of thought alone.
The idea that a contradiction or opposite form of oneself could cause someone to question their reality is a lot like the idea of what's going on with the paradox Pokémon, being similar but impossibly different and causing everyone in Paldea and the Pokémon community of our real Earth to question what's going on in these games. The imagery of reflecting in on oneself reflects back to the ideas around the Terra crystals and adds to the idea here that contradictory appearances like the bending of light by Terra crystals can create an illusionary alternate type. This part of the dialogue leads them to establishing arithmetic and the theory of numbers as the first required subject for their future leaders, just like in the games when you attend Professor Time's class and she gushes about numbers and arithmetic. Next up, we get one of my favorite subjects, sacred geometry. Geometry is established as the second subject Socrates and Glaucon would require of a philosopher king.
That this knowledge is knowledge of what always is, not knowledge of what at some particular time comes to be or perishes.
That's easily agreed.
He said,
Geometrical knowledge is knowledge of what always is.
In that case, my noble friend, it is indeed something that draws the soul towards truth. It is an instrument which produces a philosophical way of thinking by directing upwards that part of us which we now, quite wrongly, direct downwards.
Yes, it does do that. More than anything else does.
Plato does a deep dive into the role geometry plays in the creation and form of the universe in his dialogue Timaeus. He is really one of the grandfathers of sacred geometry and gave us the Platonic solids. These are concepts that have fascinated me since childhood, and I would love to explore them more in future videos. Even a whole video on sacred geometry throughout all of Pokémon and or all of Nintendo's main games. But as to how it connects to Scarlet and Violet, it does. It just does. In so many ways. Hexagons are everywhere. The graphic for the hidden treasure of Area Zero, the illustration of the legendary treasure, the illustration and description of the disc Pokemon, the floors of the bases, the entrance to the time machine, the lighting fixtures and all over the walls of the time machine, the shape of Suicune's crystal horn, the shape of the Terra symbol and the Terra orb, the artwork of Brassius, really all throughout the Pokemon franchise, and Professor Jacques' glasses, which is so conveniently pointed out to us by Professor Hassel. The art professor at the Academy gives a whole class about sacred geometry in nature and in Professor Jacques' glasses when he says,
"Now, here's some trivia about snowflakes. While snowflakes come in many different shapes and sizes, most are classified as hexagons. Just think of it, snowflakes fall from the sky, taking similar shapes without anyone saying they must. Do you not feel the great mystery of nature? The beautiful enigma we live in?"
How Platonic of Professor Hassel. This got me so excited, like the part about water in Frozen 2, if you know you know. His art class was so beautiful, I honestly was not expecting to enjoy the classes and avoided them for so long, but they are quite interesting, and did you hear all those Platonic references? The hexagons in the graphic for the hidden treasure of Paldea are arranged almost identically to the famous sacred geometric symbol known as the Fruit of Life, which, wow, hello, perfectly ties in with its fruit, circle, knowledge, and life-generating symbolism. The fact that the hidden treasure of Area Zero graphic is similar to the Fruit of Life, but not the same, has the same themes of forms imitating forms, appearances of appearances, the devil in the details, and the approximate visuals of the Paradox Pokémon and Terrestrial type imitations. The part at the end of Professor Hassel's class about the snowflakes falling in that shape by their own choice without anyone saying they must reminds me of the next and last bits of these allegories we're going to be reviewing. Socrates explains to Glaucon why there is an anti-authority contempt for the law among many of the students of these kinds of studies. This sounds like inspiration for Team Star, a whole other aspect of these games to add to the list of explanations in this theory. Socrates' explanation is about how someone whose concept of truth and reality has been altered might become distrustful of any kind of objective truth, and it goes like this.
Aren't you aware of the damage done at the moment in the name of dialectic?
What damage?
He asked. Its students are filled with what I suppose we'd call contempt for the law.
Yes, utter contempt.
Do you find it at all surprising that they should be like that? I asked. Can't you find excuses for them?
What excuses?
When someone like this encounters the question, "What is the beautiful?" and gives the answer he used to hear from the lawgiver, an argument shows it to be incorrect. What happens to him? He may have many of his answers refuted in many different ways and be reduced to thinking that the beautiful is no more beautiful or fine than it is ugly or shameful. The same with just, good, and the things he used to have most respect for. At the end of this, what do you think his attitude to these strongly held beliefs will be when it comes to respect for them and obedience to their authority?
It's impossible for him to go on feeling the same respect for them or obeying them.
I imagine he'll be thought to have changed from a law-abiding citizen into a criminal.
Students filled with contempt for the law who become disobedient criminals. Does that sound like Team Star to anyone else? It's okay, because Plato has the answers for how to trick us kids into getting learned at his academy. And it works as an explanation for why such heavy topics are being put into these Pokemon games supposedly made for children.
So arithmetic, geometry, and all the education our future rulers need as a preliminary to dialectic, these are things we should offer them while they are still children. But we shouldn't present these subjects as a compulsory syllabus they have got to learn.
Why is that?
Because for a free man, learning should never be associated with slavery. Physical exertion, imposed by force, does the body no harm, but for the soul no forced learning can be lasting.
True.
He said, in which case, my friend, when you're bringing children up, don't use compulsion in teaching them. Use children's games instead. That will give you a better idea what each of them has a natural aptitude for.
There we have it. They are using these children's games to flip us like coins to face all of this occult information behind World War II, ancient and modern times. I mean, I was already into all this stuff, but it worked on me. These games got me motivated to start getting out YouTube videos as quickly as I could and read more into many of these books than I had. Kind of amazing and so crazy that this little quote is in here alongside all of these other references from the games. Plato wraps up this book of the dialogue with a quote about a successful philosopher king having graduated from their academy.
Those who have survived and been completely successful in every sphere, both in practical affairs and in their studies, should now be conducted to the final goal and required to direct the radiant light of the soul towards the contemplation of that which itself gives light to everything. And when they have seen the good itself, they must make that their model and spend the rest of their lives, each group in turn, in governing the city, the individuals in it, and themselves, educating a continuous succession of others like themselves, and leaving them behind to take their place as guardians of the city.
This sounds like the goal of the Academies, as told to us by Clavel and Heath's page about our generous sponsor, reading,
"The data gathered has been shared with the Academy in hopes that it will aid in the institution's research work and foster future generations of scholars and scientists."
Dogs in the Republic. We're now on to the last couple of notes on Plato for this video. There are just a few more parallels to be made here with Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, and they are big but not too lengthy, like how the main storyline follows Arvin and his love for his dog, Mabostif, after Heath's story with Cyclical. Would you believe me if I told you the inspiration for this could come not only from Admiral Richard E. Byrd's love for his dog Igloo, he who shall not be named's supposed love for his dog Blondie, or Carl Jung's mythical expedition being accompanied by 3 dogs, but also from Plato's The Republic. He also talks about dogs allegorically in other works, but let's read this passage from The Republic about dogs.
Well, you can find them in a number of animals, but especially in the one we compared with our guardian. You're aware, presumably, that it is the natural disposition of purebred dogs to be as gentle as possible to those they know and recognize, and the exact opposite to those they don't know.
Yes, I am.
So such a thing is possible, I said. And in looking for a guardian of this kind, we are not looking for something unnatural.
Apparently not.
In that case, do you think the person who is going to be guardian material needs another quality as well? Do you want him, as well as being spirited and energetic, to be also by temperament a lover of wisdom, a philosopher?
What do you mean? I don't understand.
It's another thing you see in dogs, I replied. Something which makes you wonder at the animal.
What is that?
When it sees someone it doesn't know, a dog turns nasty, even though it hasn't been badly treated by him in the past. When it sees someone familiar, it welcomes him, even if it has never been at all well treated by him. Haven't you ever found that rather remarkable?
I'd never really thought about it up to now,
he said.
But I think there's no doubt a dog does behave like that.
It seems clever, this side of its nature. It seems to show a true love of wisdom.
In what way?
Because, I replied, it classifies what it sees as friendly or hostile solely on the fact that it knows one and doesn't know the other. It must be a lover of knowledge if it defines friend and enemy by means of knowledge and ignorance.
Yes,
he said.
It must.
And are love of knowledge and love of wisdom the same thing?
They are.
So can we say with some confidence of a man too, that if he is going to be someone who is gentle towards those he knows and recognizes, he must by his nature be a lover of knowledge and of wisdom?
We can.
Then will the person who is going to be a good and true guardian of our city be a lover of wisdom, spirited, swift, and strong?
He certainly will.
Well, so much for his nature. But what about the upbringing and education of our guardians? What form will those take? Will looking into that question be of some use to us in finding the answer to our main inquiry, which is how justice and injustice arise in a city? We want to cover the subject properly, without going on at enormous length. Glocken's brother answered.
Speaking for myself,
He said,
I'm quite sure that looking into it will be useful in our main aim.
In that case, my dear Dimantus, I said, we must certainly not leave it out, even if it takes longer than we expect.
No, we mustn't.
Very well, then. Let's imagine we are telling a story, and that we have all the time in the world. Let's design an education for these men of ours.
Yes, that's what we should do.
This story seems to be literally pleading with us to continue our studies, to continue putting the pieces of the puzzle together, and then to spread that information and educate those around us, like the Academies of Paldea. I feel like it encouraged me to keep going in these discoveries, to share them with all of you, and hopefully for you to finish watching these crazy long videos. Also, Plato makes it clear that we are not to fear what is alien to us. That's not the message being made here. So according to him, we are not to fear the disc Pokémon. As the dialogue says, to be of this guardian type that they are defining, one must have not only a love of familiar knowledge, but also a desire for new and unknown knowledge. A Pokémon being a guardian of a human is an obvious parallel here. And then on top of that, we have specific references to hounds and dogs, like Arven's Mabostif. People claim he who shall not be named used his relationship with his dog as propaganda to make him more likable, and that's interesting in connection to these games' plots. And after his alleged tales came the missing diary of Admiral Richard E. Byrd, which also has that parallel of a dog companion on his expedition. Now we have Plato speaking of the symbolic meaning in the Republic. These games have more dog Pokemon than any other generation before them. Perhaps this may indicate a Platonic reference with the symbolism of dogs. This main storyline of the games has been heart-wrenching for all of us. It's so relatable and something that so many of us have gone through. Plato's Pokémon. And now for the Pokémon franchise as a whole, complete. Coming full circle. There's a book published by Indiana University Press called Plato's Animals. Hear what Amazon has to say about this book.
Plato's Animals examines the crucial role played by animal images, metaphors, allusions, and analogies in Plato's dialogues. These 14 lively essays demonstrate that the gadflies, snakes, stingrays, swans, dogs, horses, and other animals that populate Plato's work are not just rhetorical embellishments. Animals are central to Plato's understanding of the hierarchy between animals, humans, and gods, and are crucial to his ideas about education, sexuality, politics, aesthetics, the afterlife, the nature of the soul, and philosophy itself. The volume includes a comprehensive annotated index to Plato's bestiary in both Greek and English.
Could this be a description that could also apply to all of Pokémon? Are all Pokémon metaphorical analogies? Many Poke theorists have uncovered many analogies through the designs of Pokémon. I thought this was something really fun to think about, and I do believe it is at the heart of the Pokémon franchise. Pokémon are like paradox animals of our real world, and their very existence helps us to wonder about the true nature of life itself in all of its various forms, like Plato's theory of forms. So what do you think? If you've been following this series since part 1, or even if you made it this far in just this video, I've got to know what you think. I've been blown away by some of the comments you have left. There's so much here to talk about, and no comment is too small of a contribution. I appreciate anything you have to say, even if it's just that you made it this far. My next video will have my conclusions, wrapping up this whole theory as concisely as possible and providing master infographics to make it all visually easy to share. I have not yet played through the Indigo Disc, so I will also make sure to do that first and include its content in the conclusions video. I know the videos in this series have been super long, and I super appreciate anyone who has given them their time. There are some people who enjoy long-form informational content like this, but future videos will be shorter and have more effort put into the production value. This was just my way of presenting all the facts in as complete of a package as possible without leaving any details out, even if it is incredibly long. That way I can get it all out there, review everything, and then make everything concise with more editing and fun visuals in my conclusion and future videos. I'd love to break out each portion of this theory into smaller videos that, although being shorter, can go more in depth to each parallel. Also, I have many more theories about the arcane, esoteric, and occult in the arts and sciences. So stay tuned, like and subscribe to help get these theories out and keep the conversation going. Let's illuminate our world together.